Hi, everybody. This is my second attempt doing this today. I just recorded I think a 45-minute fireside chat podcast for you just a moment ago, and I went to play it back, and it, suffice to say, production quality was a little not up to spec. So I'm redoing it. Happy to be here with you. What's odd is that I still have a weak voice for whatever reason. So I'm doing it again, but if you listened to my answer form that I just gave yesterday, my voice even then I thought was weak as heck, but it's getting a little bit better. So as far as this has been a huge week in the UFO field, and I want to talk a little bit more about it. I've created the theme of this episode or this chat of disclosure by inches, and it's not the way that I envisioned disclosure, for example, in the book AD After Disclosure. I'm very proud of that book, and if you don't have it, you should buy it because it's still a great book. But one of the things that Bryce and I did not get was this whole manner in which the speed of the disclosure. Our attitude was, I think we put it one way, like, Thursday, the world would be just as it always was, and by Friday it would be totally different. Something like this absolute rapid transformation of something just rapidly spinning out of control. And that's exactly what we have not been seeing over these past 3 years. And even now, over the past month, with more and more information coming out, we're really seeing a slow form of disclosure. So I've got a lot to say about it. Let me just jump right in. I've got notes here. I've just printed them off. Sometimes I have them on the screen. This time they're just printed. So I'm going to talk about the aftermath of the whole, the articles that came out in the New York Times, both of them. So you've got the main one that lots of folks in the UFO community were disappointed by. I was a little disappointed. I'm not going to lie. I know many of you were disappointed. But when I thought about it, and especially after I listened to Leslie and Ralph talk to Jay on Project Unity, and we've got that linked on the site here. Check it out if you haven't listened to it. They were quite interesting. But it occurred to me that they are, they're working within a system that is not the free American democracy. If you live in the United States, this is not the system that you grew up believing that you had. We, here in the West, whether it's US or Canada or Britain or any other Western nation, frankly, have moved in many ways toward an approximation of the old Soviet-style system. I firmly believe this now. Not to the same level of control that you saw in the Soviet Union in the 1960s or 70s, which was a very closed-off society. But what we're seeing in the West is greater and greater strides in that direction. I firmly believe that. And so with that being the case, the work that journalists like Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal are doing to get some kind of forward motion on the UFO matter is actually quite significant. And you're seeing this within the rest of there are openings in our mainstream media for this subject to be moving forward. There's people like Christopher Mellon, who I'm going to talk about him more in just a moment. Joe Rogan, who actually has been just outstanding in terms of public discourse on the UFO subject and getting it a serious hearing. So the real question that, one of the questions that we could be asking here is this something that we should be disappointed about, the way that the aftermath has happened with the New York Times pieces, or should we be optimistic? And I keep thinking of the story of Lincoln during the American Civil War. Abolitionists, whoops, you saw my nose there. Abolitionists were very unhappy with Abraham Lincoln. He was way too slow. Lincoln realized that politics is the art of the possible, and that if you're going to move forward on getting rid of slavery, which he I think, really always did want to do. You've got to know what you're dealing with in terms of the political situation around you. And, when Lincoln was elected president, for those of you who don't know this history, his attitude was, I'm not here to abolish slavery. I'm just here to end its expansion. I'm not going to allow it to move into the Western territories, and I'm not going to allow it to inch its way anywhere else. And that was enough for the fire eaters, as they were called, to know that he was their sworn enemy, and they were just going to leave. But the abolitionist attitude was slavery is a sin. Slavery is wrong, which it is wrong. And so looking at it from that moral standpoint, Lincoln was just way too vacillating, way too slow. But anyway, I'll come back to that analogy later. I think in the UFO field, we're dealing with something not as dramatic as slavery, but still something that is quite dramatic. The one thing, again, seeing that we don't really have a fully functioning true democracy, we have the words of our establishment trying to convince us that we have a genuine true democracy, but we all know that we don't really have that. And on top of that, we hear all of the babbling and rabbling from the public on social media like Twitter and YouTube and Facebook, and that can kind of convince us too that there's still some kind of public energy, some kind of public opinion out there, and that's true. But then you have to ask how much of that opinion is manipulated, how much of that opinion is informed, and I think these are very good questions to ask. In reality, I've seen the public for a long time as kind of like a horse. Horse has a bit of a will, but the horse can be, if you're a good rider, you can ride that horse. If you're a good rider, you can control that horse. And I think our society has very good riders indeed. So we don't have a free system, and quite possibly we can't have a free system. That's the thing. Is it even possible to have a free system with the kind of society that we have developed, that we default to in our imagination? We've got, there's terrible education, there's terrible news information, terrible economic prospects, evisceration and shrinking horizons for working people. You tell me how much of a free society we actually really can have. So back to what is possible in our world at our time, considering that we don't have the kind of system that we always thought we do. I think that we're looking at one of two possibilities right now in terms of the disclosure situation. So either TTSA and Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal and all their allies are actually part of a controlled CIA system by which they're rolling out a slow form of disclosure, a sanitized version of disclosure. And honestly, in theory, you cannot rule that out. Or are they, as I have been thinking they are of late, pardon me, a faction within the establishment for sure, but a faction nonetheless that has its own reasons and desires for having some measure of information on UFOs getting out to the public. And I think that's what I'm still leaning toward at the present time. All right. So seen from that perspective, yeah, I think, and also you've got voices like Rogan and Tucker Carlson, don't want to forget him. The real question is there any kind of genuine movement that these people want, like that they are actually, are they genuine? Are they enthusiastic about it? I think the answer is yes. So I don't think it's just simply they're being controlled in this case. And they have made genuine progress on this subject. Now, maybe it actually is a case that there's someone in the shadows just calling every single shot that goes out there. And if that is the case, that's a scenario that I'm going to get to down the road, and it could be true, but I don't know how to prove it or disprove it. Let me just move on here with my notes. I should have had this on my screen, and I don't know. I'm looking at it on paper for today, and All right. There's this whole other thing. So you've got all of these new voices in the media, whether it's Rogan, Carlson, Mellon, Leslie Kean, she's not new, but Ralph Blumenthal, Lou Elizondo. These are the people who actually are at the forefront right now, and they are doing their job, I think, quite well. You have a whole bunch of longtime UFO researchers, people like me, people like Linda Moulton Howe, people like Grant Cameron, researchers on the other side of the world in other countries who have been equally or more engaged in this. And then there's even other researchers who no one's even listening to them, but they're probably better than the rest of us anyway. And I'm sure some of them are wondering, hey, how come all these talking heads are getting all the attention and no one's talking to me? And the reason is that we are all doing what we are best at doing. And most of us UFO researchers don't really have great media skills. I include myself there. My media skills are mediocre at best. And I have never really had a strong relationship ever with mainstream media. So the thing is, we're all in this together, and we're all here involved in moving this football as much down the field as we can. And I do believe it has moved a lot down the field in the last 3 years and in the last couple of months. I want to talk about Mellon's interview in just a second. But back to this whole optimism versus pessimism. Is everything going too slowly or not too slowly? You think about Lincoln and the Civil War, and it took 4 years of massive bloodshed on the United States for the United States actually to end the institution of slavery. It took all of that. And we've been in the UFO business here for 3 years trying to transform the public conversation, and no one's gotten killed, and we have nothing like the drama of the American Civil War. I think we still have a long way to go before we proceed with something that's actually going to be much more dramatic. I mentioned disclosure by inches, and I think that is that's really the means by which this is moving forward. This is exactly not what I had expected 10 years ago when I wrote After Disclosure, but I think that is what's happening. And the real question is, I can't remember if I said this in this segment or the previous segment. The real question is, is it a matter of just doing baby steps, or is it a matter of the baby steps are so small that we're never going to get to the major steps? So let me get to that in a second. Let me talk about Mellon. So I'm going to have to link to Chris Mellon's interview he did with CNN just, I think today or yesterday. Really good interviews, probably the best interview CNN did on UFOs, even better than what they did with Elizondo when he came out a couple of years ago. The interviewer of Mellon actually opened by saying it is probably time to stop calling UFO believers crackpots. I thought, wow, CNN, not bad for you. He then referred to Eric Davis and Davis's statement in the New York Times about briefing people in the Pentagon and on Capitol Hill about retrievals from off-world vehicles not made on this earth. All of that was quoted on CNN even before they got to Mellon. And by the way, have you noticed that statement that was in the New York Times and that they repeated on CNN, not made on this earth? Sound a little familiar? Does it remind you of the Wilson document, notes by Eric Davis, not made by human hands, not of this earth? Yeah, think so. That phrase has not gone away, and it's really entering our mainstream parlance kind of through the back door. Just a little more support for those notes, which we all know are totally legit. Anyway, Mellon, I thought, was fantastic. He handled this interview very astutely. Noted that Scientific American had covered the subject recently and said it was serious and that it needed to be studied scientifically in a serious manner. He talked about the Pentagon and the Navy taking the subject very seriously, that is UFOs. He used the phrase UFO in the interview, not just UAP. So I think we're coming back to using the phrase UFO. It's been introduced enough. The cat's kind of out of the bag here. He was asked, do we have real crash retrievals, or words to that effect? And his answer, I thought, was really apropos, was very astute. Again, he said that assertion should be taken seriously. I thought, yeah, that's actually really well. He didn't say, I think that there had been. He didn't say absolutely. He didn't say anything, but he kept it very serious. He kept it moving forward. And then he stated, this was, if there was one bombshell in the interview, it was that he was present at Eric Davis's briefings on Capitol Hill. This is actually something that I already knew. Maybe some of you might have known it as well. It wasn't widely discussed, but I did know that Christopher Mellon was there and was involved. Of course, he's going to be involved. He knows all the people up there better than Davis knows them. And for all we know, maybe he had a hand in setting them up. Won't say anything else there, but very likely, I would say. And then he mentioned Trump, and I thought that was interesting. And Donald Trump's Father's Day comment, but he indicated on air that, and this really kind of blew by the UFO community, it seemed to me, that he did have classified information on Roswell. Like, yeah, classified. What information on Roswell would be classified to this day? That's really interesting to know. Trump said that he'd read it. Now, maybe Trump was just talking out of his ass. Who really knows? But if we take him at his word, and I don't see why not in this case, when Don Jr. asked him about this, like, can you tell me more? His dad said, well, I'll have to think about it. So all of that's coming out. Very interesting. Could you imagine if Barack Obama or George W. Bush or Bill Clinton had said that they had classified information on Roswell? That really would have been a huge bombshell. And this is just sort of dripping out. But even so, you can definitely see that things are speeding up in terms of UFO information. So all of this was really interesting information out of Mellon's interview. Now, one thing you have to, some of us ruefully can't help but notice is that Mellon and Elizondo and Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal and CNN and Tucker Carlson are all talking about this subject as if it's something brand new, as if there's no history to it. And this really is the necessary fiction that all of us who follow the subject know better. This is not new. In the last Answer Forum, I talked about that case that I just love talking about from 1936 at Aylmer Lake in the Northwest Territories of Canada, middle of nowhere. I love talking about this case because I found it in the Canadian Archives. So yeah, give me that much. But also, it's ever since Fravor's Tic Tac incident has come out, I'm interested in that early case even more because it's quite evident that that is a Tic Tac UFO. And again, since I just talked about it, I don't want to go into all of the details, but you got this 25-year-old guy out in the middle of nowhere seeing a slightly elongated object, gray, not white in this case, but rotating and instantly accelerating and gone. The writer was very articulate. He was obviously a dignified gentleman at the time he wrote it, in his 70s by then. And it just was something that had baffled him. But if you take that sighting as legitimate, and I do, you have to say the technology that Fravor saw in 2004 existed 70 years before that, in the 1930s, in the middle of nowhere. So it's things like that. And then you have cases all through the 1940s where the U.S. Army, the U.S. Air Force, and then the Navy were tracking objects with similar types of capabilities, with theodolites and other kinds of measuring instruments. There's no shortage of information about this. But yet you've got our media establishment pretending as if all of this is brand new. And it's just a bit odd for someone like me to be hearing this, thinking, wait a minute, you're siphoning all the history out. So the question is, like, why would that be happening? I think there's a couple of reasons. If you're dealing with a controlled sort of disclosure, you need this necessary fiction that we're handling it in a new way. Because the one thing they're not doing is discussing the implications of a cover-up. If all of this is new, then there's basically no cover-up. 10 years ago, and more than that, actually, I was giving lectures and writing articles about the means by which disclosure would happen. And I have to say, I kind of called it in some ways. So after I wrote After Disclosure, I gave a bunch of lectures on disclosure, naturally. And I came up with 4 multiple types of potential disclosure. One I called fascist disclosure, or I think I changed it later to controlled disclosure. And then I had one called accidental disclosure. And then there was one called insider disclosure, and one was called people-driven disclosure. And there were all of these different scenarios that I was kind of trying to visualize to see how might this secret end. Accidental disclosure was sort of what Bryce and I wrote about in AD. That is something unexpected happening that catches the elite off guard, and they're on the back foot, and it all just spills out. That's what we thought. That's not what's happening right now. Fascist disclosure or controlled disclosure was always the one that after I completed After Disclosure, I definitely came to the opinion quickly on that fascist type of disclosure was our leading candidate, actually, which was not what we wrote about in the book. So in fascist disclosure, I envisioned kind of like the world we have now, except I didn't think it would happen this fast. That is a world in which the elites, as it were, have so much total control over the narrative. They've controlled the propaganda system. They've controlled the news media. They've controlled the education. They've controlled the entire global system, the internet, the web, to a degree that they would then be confident that they could control the narrative of their disclosure, that if there are competing voices, they would be marginalized enough that they wouldn't have to worry about them. And that's actually kind of what's happening. That's actually what we are seeing. And so the real question that I ask are we, because, well, let me just finish that thought. So in a fascist disclosure, you have this idea that you can't keep the secret forever. Even in a fascist society, sometimes you have to recognize the reality that we're in a rapidly changing society. Information is being changed and exchanged rapidly. And so the UFO information and subject is volatile enough that it is in danger of destabilizing your society. So what you have to do is get out in front of that and control that narrative to the best of your ability. And you sanitize the subject to the best of your ability. And we are definitely seeing that. We are definitely seeing that. And you've got a, stupefied public, poorly educated public and all of that, and toxified with bad food and lots of drugs, and both legal and other illegal and illegal. It just keeps people basically uninformed and unenlightened, and it's easy to control. So we are seeing that happening. And what I haven't personally decided for myself is, are we seeing that I predicted 10 plus years ago, or are we seeing a faction within that establishment for its own reasons wanting to push some level of a disclosure narrative? And but even in that case, if they are doing that, then they have to work within that system. Like, they can't rock the boat unduly, or they won't be able to get their message out. Like, there's only so far they can go. I mean, I've had a couple of conversations with some of the insiders at TTSA, and I can just tell you flat out, they know full well they've only got a certain amount of leeway in how they can talk about this subject with the major media before they lose all credibility. So anyway, we're in a highly sanitized form of disclosure. And the question is, and it's going slowly enough by inch by inch that you have to wonder, will we get to a tipping point, an avalanche, as it were, or will it just be inch by inch by inch so slowly that it will take forever and there will never be a tipping point? That's a question. And I don't know if I have the answer to that, but let's try to let's try to explore that. So when we think of long-term implications, do we have reason to be optimistic long-term or pessimistic long-term? And as I was saying in my extended lecture back on June 6th, Fourth Stage of Humanity and the Alien Agendas, I think we are moving very rapidly, more rapidly than I had anticipated, to a very tightly controlled society. Control over information, control over the public, control over public's ideas and expression and movement. Now in the COVID era, we're definitely seeing control over public movement. Whether that's permanent or not is another question, but step by step, we're seeing this all happen. So in that kind of a world, where economic opportunity for the great many people might very well be slipping away, they can't afford to have freedom. You give a whole bunch of unhappy, unemployed people total freedom and encourage them to think for themselves. Well, you see what kind of societal craziness you're going to get on your hands. So obviously we're moving into a situation of very strong intellectual and emotional control over people. And that makes it easier, actually, for a very controlled form of disclosure, one that's sanitized, that, works in that favor. Even so, the UFO subject is volatile enough in and of itself that you can never really know. You can never really know. But let's move into another area here. And this is something that's come up on our comments in our forums and in my own ruminations on this. If we are in a situation, like what if we are in a walking among us situation, which I suspect that we are to, I don't know if it's exactly as Jacobs envisioned it, with hybrids that are walking among us with total mind control ability to control our society for some kind of takeover. But I think David was onto it. David Jacobs was onto it, and is onto it. There are non-human humans walking among us, and they're working for the other team. And that other team includes insectoids, and maybe reptilians and greys. And they have a goal of using this planet according to their own needs. Maybe they'll be willing to share this planet with the other human inhabitants. Maybe they are interested in dominating the infrastructure so that their humans can live a pretty good life here and do the things for them that they need them to do, and extracting whatever mineral wealth and resources from planet Earth that they can extract. Nothing wrong with taking over someone else's planet if you don't have to fight an open war to get it. And if that is the case, if they have got their hooks into our infrastructure in significant ways, then we really have to ask, is this form of disclosure working in their interests? And I think the answer has to be yes, it is. A sanitized form of disclosure would work in the interests of an invasive elite that just wants things very quiet. To keep a secret, sometimes you have to give a little bit of it up. That's the thing. I think it was Alan Dulles who said, to keep a secret, you have to pretend to share it. So a little bit of disclosure could be exactly what the doctor ordered, in the sense of keeping their party going for as long as possible. So there is that. But the other possibility, and I still cannot rule it out, is that you've got a genuine faction of truly well-meaning people within the establishment who are trying to push the disclosure narrative out, and with the anticipation of having a step-by-step playing out of subsequent layers of the UFO secret. After all, we're talking a lot more about crash retrievals than we were a year ago. I mean, we were talking about it publicly a year ago as well, but I think it's definitely been amped up a little bit in the public discourse. And will that portend additional future greater openings in the whole UFO history? The thing is, I think that, they haven't yet figured out how to square the circle with this. In other words, if you want disclosure, right, you're going to have to confront the fact that there has been a massive cover-up for generations, for an entire human lifetime, that has involved not simply the military, not simply the intelligence community, but it has involved every major powerful institution of our society has been complicit. I came 20 plus years ago out of the world of academia, and I was really focused on them at the time. Academia is absolutely complicit in the UFO cover-up. So is the media. So is the scientific community. They all are. And no one's going to really want to confront that reality. And no one's going to want to confront the reality of deep black budget programs that have been running essentially as illegal operations. Legal illegality, as I always call it. To confront that whole massive structure is so big. And yet here you see this attempt of this little group of people pushing disclosure to some extent in the major media and having success, by the way. And you just have to wonder, how far are they going to be able to go before something breaks? I firmly believe something's going to break, but I just can't say when and how much farther down the road we're going to have to go before it happens. And can the effort just stall? Can it stall? Can it get to the point where we are told, well, this is everything that we've learned, and we haven't learned anything else, and now we're at a new stasis? Can that happen? And it's worth thinking about what that stasis would be. In other words, yes, our military has been chasing these things. Yes, we obtained some material, not bodies. We've obtained some material that we can't quite figure out. And ask yourself, is that a potential stop sign for this major media push that we're been currently seeing toward some openness on UFOs? I actually think it is possible that it could stop right there. That talk about bodies, no. I mean, you'd have the whole subculture, our culture, where we know better and we know that, yes, there's been material in bodies. And we could be screaming it till we're blue in the face. But until some black budget insider or some government official comes out and says it, and that may never happen, no one's going to care what the research community thinks about this. And I can say no one cares because no one's really been asking. I mean, think about it. And I actually don't even mind. Like, I'm not, this is not a complaint. I'm just saying, noting that no one is really talking to experienced UFO researchers in the mainstream media. And I think that is telling. Because if they were to talk to experienced UFO researchers, they would be getting a very, very different story on this. And it's one that I think it's pretty obvious they don't want that story out yet, if ever. So lots to think about with this, these baby steps, disclosure by inches, disclosure stop sign. There's a lot of disclosure scenarios here to be thinking about. Let me see if I actually had more to say in my last segment. I kind of riffed on a few other things, but let me just look here. Yeah, one other thing I just want to mention. Are we humans who are now entering our fourth stage of existence? We go from hunting and gathering to agriculture to science and industry to transhumanism. Transhumanism, including 5G, total surveillance, basic universal basic income, welfare state, surveillance state, all of that. Are we creating a world that is beautifully designed for those interlopers, owners, managers of our world, for their benefit? And, in the last couple of years, I've just been thinking more and more, yep, it sure looks like that to me. And I know there's a number of you members who believe the same thing. Some of you have been quite vocal about it and very articulate about it, and I happen to agree with the thesis. So are we creating a world ready to give them as our prize? Are we the prize? Is our new infrastructure the prize to make it all the better for them to extract whatever wealth out of planet Earth that they want to extract? Yeah, quite possibly yes. All right, so that's all I want to talk about in terms of thematic. I just want to do a couple of updates. First of all, I want to give a shout out to the recent encounter group that met by Zoom, run by people like Jay and Sherry and Kirsten. They had a guest speaker who is absolutely awesome and a very active, engaged Zoom community. These are folks who've had encounter experiences, and I'm super proud that our website can accommodate encounter sessions like that. I absolutely think that it's, I'm just very proud of it. And that essentially, that reminds me of something else I wanted to talk about with this theme, which is what's being left out of the sanitized history that we're not really getting. Okay, so decades and decades of military encounters, decades and decades of cover-up, decades and decades of black budget, technology, scientific investigation of who the hell knows how far they've gone with their scientific breakthroughs. All of that's off records. And then maybe where the rubber really meets the road most of all, encounters by people, ordinary people, with those other beings. That's completely being written off right now. And the question that we really want to ask is, like, will that ever get on the table publicly? Right now it's sort of bubbling at a low level, and it hasn't really surfaced. But and I'm not saying it can't, but right now it's not happening. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to mention. I think I mentioned this in my first go at this podcast, and I don't think I'm repeating myself here. But one of the things that I used to talk about 10 plus years ago was how it was really necessary if we're going to have UFO disclosure, we needed to see cultural change. And the example that I used to give from time to time was how rapidly our society changed in relation to something like gay marriage. And if you go back to the 1990s, public opinion on gay marriage was, in all Western societies, was dead set against it. I don't know the numbers, but it was like 70-30 against, or 80-20 against, or some really lopsided amount. And in the space of one generation, like 20 years, it just was reversed. And that shows you. And then, of course, all the laws were passed that allowed for gay marriage, and now it's universal, like everywhere practically in the Western world. So you change the culture, you change the laws. It's a really obvious example. And I remembered thinking years ago, and I couldn't see how this could happen in the UFO field. But I thought, well, we have got to find a way to change the culture to make the UFO subject more widespread and respectable, and for people to be talking about it. And then if you can change the culture, you can change the laws. I said this so many times, I just forgot how many times I said it. And what we are seeing is that cultural change, and it's happening way faster than I thought, and much more suddenly than I had anticipated. Really all in the last 3 years. That's it. More than 3 years ago, we were right where we had been forever. And suddenly we're in a completely different place. I'm just blown away by that. And the thing is that cultural change has been pushed and prodded for years and years by people like you, people like me, people in the UFO community who've been unafraid to talk about it publicly. But it's really been taken over by establishment media voices. And I'm not begrudging them a bit on this. If they're able to change that culture, then that's how, let's get it done that way. Because the fact is, we're not in the kind of open, free society that we like to think. We're in a Soviet-style system. And so you've got to let that bureaucracy have its way. And if they're doing it, then they're doing it. That's part of my attitude. And we'll see where it all leads. The question is, can UFO disclosure truly stay in a controlled inch-by-inch manner, or will it break out? And that's the question, I think, in the next 5 years that we really want to be looking at. Can the UFO subject just be stopped at a certain point in its disclosure movement, or can it become unstoppable? Yeah, that's a real question. Okay, so I'm going to end this here, but I will mention just, let's see. Oh, yeah. So some of the things that I'm working on here. And I've been a little quiet this last, actually a couple of weeks. I want to get some more publishing projects done. And so that means more writing, a little less YouTube. So it doesn't mean no YouTube. It does. I'm just trying to find a balance here. But for example, I just got a really, I think, a good Spanish translation back of UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. I say I think because I'm not a fluent Spanish reader, but I think it's good, and I'm going with it. And so if you are fluent in Spanish and you want to be my reader, look, sorry, thanks, but I'm just cranking it out right now. So I've got it back. I'm formatting the book, and I'm just going to publish it, paperback and ebook. I think it's very good. My sister, who is fluent Spanish speaker, told me that at least the passages she read she thought were very good. So yeah, I'm kind of excited about that. Some audiobook projects as well. I can't be the voice for all of them. There's just too much. It's too much. You just got to let me find good readers. For 21st Century Mind, yes, I still want to wrap that up. You can tell my voice has not been good lately. But that project, yes, but all the other books that I have audio rights to, which is basically all of them except After Disclosure, I'm just going to get readers for. So I just found what I think is a good reader for Volume 2. I only recently learned that I had the audio rights to Volume 1 of National Security State. I don't have the publishing rights, but I've got the audio rights, and I'm not giving those up. So I'm going to get an audiobook of that created as well. Why not? So these are kind of things I just want to do. And now the one priority that I have in all of this is this website and you as members of this website. So that's something that no one's going to be able to pull out of my, I am absolutely committed to keeping this as a thriving, happy community. So I'm just very, very grateful for your presence here. So that means I will be continuing to do, I think I want to do more of these answer forums. I liked the one that I did this week on ET and natural resources. Really outstanding question. I'm going to get to another one that I've got in my sights, and I think that individual knows who that is. And what I would do also is encourage you, if you have questions you would like me to address individually as a specific post, even put it in the comment below this post here. I'll see it, and I'll set it aside. And if I feel like I can do it well, I'll do it. I'll actually really be happy to do that. I want to do some more off the cuffs with Tracy. Haven't done too many of those lately, but we'll get back to it. We'll get back in the groove. And I want to do some written pieces, continue with news commentary when I'm able to. Again, the Mellon interview on CNN, I'm going to post. I'll probably just post that separately so that you can have that as a dedicated thing. And any other UFO news, I just want to be able to come up, put it onto our site with my own commentary. I think these are useful. One of the members mentioned a few weeks ago if I would, in addition to doing the extended fireside chat podcasts, maybe shorter, more newsy types of commentary. And I thought, it's kind of a good idea. And to the extent that I'm able to do it, I would like to do that. So, and if you've been paying attention, I have been doing that a little bit more lately. So expect more of that as well. So we've got a lot to look forward to here. I'm enjoying being here with you every week and figuring out a happy medium to deal with the world of video and the world of writing, and doing the kind of work that I really want to stay with doing. That is research and coming up with some ideas that are worthwhile to listen to. All right. With that, I think, is that everything else here? Yep. I think that's pretty much everything. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention. Yeah. Just so the other thing Tracy and I have been doing is, don't laugh, back taxes. We're just getting it done. We're a little late. We had the extension, I know, almost done. And then her immigration status, we're wrapping that up. So she had the 2-year immigration thing. That was good, but now we have to do a renewal. And so we have been just swamped in our paperwork all week. So there you have it. All right. So wish us luck. And I'll also for my Tuesday, for our Tuesday YouTube, I think I'm going to do a solo analysis, maybe even a little more formal, of what I've just done here for YouTube. I'm going to think about that. Okay. That's it for now. I wish all of you a great evening, great day, wherever you are in the world. Do stay safe, stay free, and stay engaged to the best of your ability in our world, and definitely make some time for the people that you love and the people who love you. That's probably the most worthwhile thing any of us can do. Catch you all next time.